I'm Patrick Byers, retired Horticulture Field Specialist and Produce Food Safety Specialist with University of Missouri Extension. Thank you for joining us for this series of videos on-farm produce food safety. Hands touch produce. It's just a reality that as we grow, harvest, handle, and market produce, that hands are going to touch it. And we have to recognize that people can be a source of contamination from the standpoint of produce. And there's three areas in particular that we need to be concerned about. Those are the areas, first of all, of hygiene, secondly, health, and finally, injuries. Let's talk first about hygiene, and we'll start with hand washing. We all think we know how to wash our hands, but do we really? The first thing to think about is what are the parts of an effective hand washing station? First of all water used for hand washing must be potable, it must be drinking water quality. Secondly, we need soap. Third, we need single-use paper towels. Fourth, we need a waste receptacle in which to place those towels after they've been used. And finally, we need the wastewater to drain away in such a way that it doesn't become a risk of contamination itself. When you wash your hands, always remember the 20-second rule. Do a good, thorough job of washing your entire hands. Make sure that you dry your hands and then turn off the water with the towel, and make sure you dispose of the towel properly in the waste receptacle. Now, it is possible to do things wrong, and let's take a look at some of the common problems that happen when we're washing hands. First of all, not washing hands for a long enough period of time. Secondly, touching things that contaminate the hands after they've been washed. Third, dropping paper towels on the floor. Fourth, contaminating your hands after the washing process, and it's so easy to do unconsciously. There are some other aspects of hygiene to consider. First of all, a clean clothes policy. People should arrive at the farm at the beginning of the workday in clean clothes, and if necessary, clothes should be changed during the course of the day if they become soiled. Hand washing is an important part of cleanliness at this point as well. Secondly, a glove policy. Gloves are not required, but if gloves are used, they need to be used properly, and hands should always be washed and clean before they go into gloves, and gloves should be changed as they become contaminated. And finally, a break policy. Have a designated area for breaks where people can relax, take refreshment, or eat away from where produce is grown, handled, or stored. Sick people should not handle produce, and it's very important to keep this in mind. If someone is sick, they should not be handling produce. Now, what does being sick mean? Well, first of all, a fever. A person who's running a fever should not be working with produce. Secondly, losing bodily fluids. A person who is coughing, sneezing, has diarrhea, or is otherwise losing bodily fluids should not be working with produce. And finally, a person who has yellowed eyes or other evidence of jaundice should not be working with produce. The question, of course, is when can a sick person return to work? Well, I think a reasonable approach is to use the Centers for Disease Control guidance of 24 hours symptom-free before returning to work. This is a good indication that a person is no longer shedding the pathogens that can make other people sick if they end up on produce. Injuries happen on the farm, and in the course of injuries, it's possible for produce to become contaminated. Now, in the case of an injury, especially a mild injury, the first step is to stabilize the situation and care for the injured person. Administer first aid if necessary, and then bandage the wound. If the wound is minor and it's on a hand, the hand can be gloved and the person can return to work. Make sure that any produce that was contaminated during the course of the injury is discarded. It's also important to clean and sanitize any food contact surfaces, such as tabletops, tools, or other surfaces that have become contaminated, and then wash your hands after the entire process. In conclusion, people can be a source of contamination of produce. It's important, first of all, to practice good hygiene habits, particularly washing and bathroom habits. Secondly, if you're sick, don't work with produce. And finally, in the case of an injury, treat the injury and clean up any contamination. I'm Patrick Byers, retired Horticulture Field Specialist and Produce Food Safety Specialist with University of Missouri Extension. Thank you for joining us for this series of videos on produce food safety.